Associate Editor Jacqui Fatka will lead the next panel.
Thank you, Phil, and I'm excited to be moderating this panel today. Senators Bob Dole and George McGovern both came from rural states but very different ideological backgrounds, yet their work together in the 1970s really was the important start of a marriage of food and farm policy, and their names, Dole and McGovern, will forever be associated with that bipartisan support of farm policy that we also just heard from GT2. Since then, a coalition of farm groups and food companies and hunger advocacy groups have truly worked together to advance the Farm Bill with the inclusion of a nutrition title within the broader Farm Bill's programs. So I'm delighted to be with you today to moderate a panel on how food banks, food companies, and farmers are building common ground. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about a new coalition officially launch today, Farmers Feed America, including all the companies here on the stage and other organizations as well. Because we know that without that common ground, it's going to be difficult to pass a farm bill in 2023. We already have enough things to make it difficult, but we also enter into this discussion with many new challenges coming out of the pandemic, but also unique solutions implemented on the ground to improve food security. On our panel today, we have three unique perspectives of this important coalition, each working with a common goal of feeding a growing population. So first, please welcome Erika Thiem, who serves as the Chief Supply Chain Officer of Feeding America. Her team works to innovate and build donor partnerships with food manufacturers, retailers, food service operators, and agricultural food producers to meet today's demand for healthy food and work to create a hunger-free tomorrow. Next, we have Joby Young, who became the Executive Vice President of the American Farm Bureau Federation in July 2022. He has more than a decade of experience in food and ag policy, from the halls of Congress to the executive branch, where he served as Chief of Staff for former Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. And finally, new possibly to many of you, we're glad to have David Chavern, President and CEO of the Consumer Brands Association, the trade organization for America's $2.1 trillion of consumer packaged goods industry that represents nearly 2,000 iconic food, beverage, household, and personal care products. He joined Consumer Brands in January of this year. So lots of great insights. We're excited to hear them. Also, just to remind everyone, we do have Slido. So if you want to enter in your questions, we're going to start off with a few, but if I get some good questions, I will make sure I get to those Slido questions, so be sure to enter those in. And we're going to just start off with Erika here, and we'll go down the line. But as this panel is titled Common Ground, I want to give each of you an opportunity to share some of the areas that you see shared common ground and some of your priorities and key focuses as you head into this 2023 Farm Bill debate, but what lays the foundation for your organization and your priorities?
Sure. Great. Thank you, Jacqui, and good morning, everyone. Feeding America was founded as a national organization to strengthen partnerships on the ground between food producers, retailers, and food banks to safely and efficiently connect food to people facing hunger. We know that and understand that underpinning of partnerships, those successful and strong partnerships, are really what makes this possible. And as you mentioned, Jacqui, I'm excited today on the 50th anniversary of Ag Day to share a new part of that partnership. Today, together with other partners in the food industry, Feeding America is announcing the Farmers Feed America Coalition. This nonpartisan coalition has a goal of coming together to call for a strong 2023 Farm Bill that meets the needs of America's farmers and protects federal nutrition programs. We are excited to work as a coalition to advocate for a strong farm bill that continues to strengthen these longstanding partnerships between farm and food security organizations.
Joby, we'll go to you next. What do you see as some of your key foundation platform as you head forward in this year and maybe next?
Sure. Well, thank you, Jacqui, and thanks to the whole Agri-Pulse team for putting together this summit, and thanks to all of you for being here and engaging in these important conversations. For those of you who don't know, the American Farm Bureau Federation is the largest general-purpose ag organization in the country, representing farmer and ranch families through our state farm bureaus in 50 states and Puerto Rico. And those are folks across all sizes and types and industries and commodities in the farming and ranching world. And as you might imagine, with a constituency like that, reaching common ground is something that we've had to work on for years when we're talking about policy issues and priorities and all the rest. And sometimes that's easy, sometimes that's a interesting family process, but it's something we work on every single day, and it's something that's important in our work. Outside of the Farm Bureau family, when we work with other industry stakeholders and partners like the other panelists here, Eric and Dave, but we actually arrive at a number of policy priorities for the Farm Bill, and those cover. We have policy on any number of areas, but some of the really high level aspects of that are maintaining a unified Farm Bill, maintaining and increasing the baseline program funding for those ag programs, like Dr. Newton on the prior panel was outlining, protecting that voluntary, market-driven, and science-based conservation approach that we've had in this country in our Farm Bill programs over time, and things of that nature. So we look forward to working with all the groups, not just those represented on this panel, but folks on those sorts of issues as we go forward.
It's all you now, David.
Wow. Okay, thank you, everybody. I think this is my first public event in this role, so I get a lot of grace, hopefully, from the group because of that. Thank you so much. Really thrilled to be here. Consumer Brands Association represents a wide range of the major consumer food producers in the United States. These are companies that not only produce things that people use every day, they use them every minute of every day. And we are intensely tied to the consumer and delivering really good value for the consumer. But also that carries with it a huge amount of responsibility. We take that responsibility very seriously, and part of that is working with groups, as indicated here today, farm groups, hunger groups, ensuring there's little or no space between us in terms of delivering a great, effective, integrated farm bill. We have a couple core principles that we deeply focus on: availability, accessibility, and affordability, and basically we test everything against those principles. We have some particular policy areas that we focus on, including consumer choice, but sort of beyond that, it is working with these groups and delivering a really effective farm bill, and we're thrilled to be here today and working with these folks.
We learned during the pandemic that when the federal government does take action, they can pivot quickly and provide food and resources to those in need, as well as help farmers find markets for their products. Cars were lined up for miles at food banks. We expanded summer food programs and free school lunches. In a sense, we had several kind of pilot projects over the last couple of years. Joby, we're going to start with you. What did we learn from these pandemic programs, and how can we apply those lessons learned in future policy discussions?
Sure. So I suppose I had a unique position to talk about this question, having been that one of my former hats was at USDA during that time, chief of staff for Secretary Perdue. When March 2020 came along and any number of things started to sort of cascade from the pandemic circumstances we found ourselves in. And so I can tell you all at that time, the team across USDA implementing these programs, and obviously other places in the government as well, but specifically to food and agriculture, we're getting calls every day about a different piece of the system, our food supply chain system that had sort of long been trusted and taken for granted in a myriad different ways. There was a kink in this, or there was a breakdown in that, and so I got to observe from my position a number of very talented, innovative, dedicated people. Of course, at USDA, career civil servants and others that might work at places like AMS or Food Nutrition Service and a number of other agencies across the department exercise those innovative approaches and that dedication mission, but also partners represented here on the panel across your food banks and your food companies. Farmers and ranchers across the country that had to figure out different ways to harvest their crop and bring things to market. Non-traditional partners, folks that at USDA, weren't normally on the phone with these different agencies and leaders across the agency. You wouldn't normally find retailers and groceries stores interacting that much with USDA. You might not find people in the seafood industry and so forth. So there was a diverse group of people. But one thing I would observe, as an initial matter, is a sort of common purpose. Theme in keeping with the theme of the panel here. It was a group of people across the food supply chain with a lot of different hats that were all dedicated to feeding people and make sure that their neighbors and the communities out there, places that getting food, whether you had the means or you didn't have the means, it was difficult across our society that actually got there. And so we saw a lot of innovative approaches to that. We saw a lot of flexibility. We saw a lot of folks have partnerships and work together that maybe weren't used to doing that previously, and really sort of sharpen their pencils and work long nights and weekends and bandy about a lot of different ideas on whiteboards across the country to come up with new and innovative ways to do those things. And so, I would say that is a little bit of that was a moment of clarity brought about by some difficult circumstances. But it taught us a lesson that can be done in general. And sometimes it takes that to sort of reveal those sorts of things to us. And I would suggest that that's a primary lesson that we just have as a baseline is that there's room for those sorts of innovations. There's room for that ingenuity. There's room for that partnership as we approach a farm bill, as we approach policy making, a number of other places in the food and agriculture space.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, interesting. Not only was it a great exercise in cooperation between, as you noted, folks who may not have been worked as closely together before, but also a real lesson in transparency and honesty about systems, capabilities, challenges. I mean, my members work really hard so that you don't notice the supply chain, right? The stuff always is there. That's certainly their goal and expectation. But this was a time where we had to deeply explore exactly how did things get from the farm to the consumer and what wasn't working, and being honest and open about that, and workarounds and finding partnerships. So really, I think was a lesson, and that's going to feed into the Farm Bill in terms of let's be open, honest, and cooperative because we're all in this together.
I'm going to piggyback quick on the supply chain because you had mentioned that and kind of builds off some of the things you may add to that as well. But the supply chain challenges within the pandemic also brought a renewed focus on the supply chain, but there's also some things that could bring unintended consequences. So what did we learn about the supply chain, and how do we want to make sure that we don't make things worse within the supply chain? I'll turn to you, Erika, and then David, if you want to hop in there right after her.
Yeah, sure. And I might just touch a little bit on that previous question too, echoing the partnership and the innovation. I'd like to list a few things that were tried and piloted during the pandemic that really are active now related to the supply chain that are great starting points for the Farm Bill work ahead. You think about students that were home, homeschooling when schools were closed during the pandemic, and how food rescue organizations, food charities were working to provide EBT cards for those families so that meals which were previously provided at school could be used at home. And together with the leadership, the bipartisan leadership of Congress, we now have a summer EBT program that's permanent for our students. So there's an example of a great accomplishment that came through the pandemic that is persisting forward. Online food purchases. People being home and needing different ways to access food. We piloted a lot more advancements with online SNAP opportunities, and those pilots continue. We think that's a great way to continue to have access to food through online purchasing. Through the pandemic, supply chains needed to move to, and food banks, to contact-free modes of distribution. We were able to do that and also work on home delivery options. That is, again, another part of the innovation that we look to continue at Feeding America going forward with programs like our Order Ahead technology. We have regional cooperatives, 8 of them across the country, that work to combine not only produce foods, but protein and dairy foods into boxes that help support that contact-free distribution model. As we've seen that volunteers are back and pantries are reopening, the need for that food box model is less needed today. But the fact that we have strengthened partnerships with agri-food producers, that we have over 900 million pounds of food, not including food that comes from TFAP and other federal commodity programs, as a new source of food, healthy food, high-density nutrition food for people facing hunger is another example of how a challenge during the pandemic with supply chains has changed into a new opportunity for us going forward. So those are a few examples of how diversifying our supply chain during the pandemic is leading to innovation, adaptability, and flexibility going into the Farm Bill.
Turn back to you, David. Challenges on the supply chain and opportunities to build on that and prevent unintended consequences.
Yeah, probably the biggest lesson learned was constant vigilance, right? The supply chain is not something that works or is broken as a binary. It's something you got to keep working all of the connections, all of the elements all the time to try to prevent breaks over time. By the way, we had a really good engagement with the government over COVID, and there were a number of things where, we saw some real progress. Certainly, on the rail strike issue, Ocean Shipping Reform Act, just a lot of information exchange and engagement. But we just got to keep at it. There are things we're currently supporting. There's a bill in Congress. You got to talk about it carefully. The Ship It Act. So you better be careful about how you say that. But around trucking and improvements in the trucking systems, at core, the lesson is you got to keep at it. In that, as a corollary, there's something that's happening now that we're very concerned about. You may or may not be aware of. There's a new petition at the ITC under the Department of Commerce to put significant tariffs on tin plate steel. That may sound obscure, but what that will do is vastly increase the cost of anything in a can, period. And so this is a setback in terms of supply chains and affordability. So again, I think the lesson from our end is there is no end. You just got to keep at it and keep improving it. Certainly, we're in a moment now where supply chains are better than they were, but they're not perfect, and it's never going to be perfect. You got to keep at the problem all the time.
One of those words on our word Google or word toggle that we had at the start is sustainability. Obviously a huge topic for everyone here, but also varying degrees on that, whether that is economic sustainability, farm viability, environmental outcomes, or being able to feed a world population that continues to grow. From each of your organization's perspectives, how are you balancing those different definitions of sustainability to accomplish what you want to see moving forward? We'll start with you, David.
Oh, excellent. Great, thank you. My members talk a lot about sustainability in a number of different directions. Yes, a big part of that is environmental sustainability. They want to be great corporate citizens and get at our common challenges on the environment. But it's also sustainability of all the businesses, that not only their businesses, but the ones they deal with. They want to shorten supply chains. They want domestic production where it's possible. They want to lower costs where it's possible. And I think very often that word sustainability gets just applied in one direction, but certainly our members think of it in all of those dimensions. A big focus is obviously packaging sustainability, really vastly improving our crazy patchwork recycling systems across the U.S. and making them actually functional and making them actually return content that can be reused at domestically and at lower cost and all the rest. And so a big part of our focus is certainly on the packaging sustainability side, but again, our members think about that in every dimension. They want a more sustainable environment, but they also look at that as making their businesses more sustainable.
Go ahead, Joby. You can go answer that next.
Yeah, so sustainability obviously is sort of woven into the fabric of the agriculture industry and farming and ranching in this country, has been since the outset. And I think that's proven by the advances that the American farmer and ranchers made over the decades. 140 million acres in conservation, the productivity from a shrinking amount of land in production over the decades. 100 million more acres we needed to produce the same amount today that it would have, decades ago. Those advances continue to be made through technology, through improved practices, through new and changing things every single day. But bound up in your question there was exactly how we talk about it, because that's how farmers and ranchers think about it, and is a necessary way to frame sustainability, which is, of course, environmental sustainability, improving those outcomes in soil and water and air and all the rest. But then also the economic sustainability of a farm and ranch family, and the ability for that family, often multi-generational, or maybe that's passed on to a new young farmer and rancher that's from a different background, to move on and steward that land, not just today, this month, this year, but over across generations as well. And then importantly to this panel and those on the panel, but that sustainability of being able to continue to provide an affordable, nutritious, accessible source of food for our country, our neighbors, and our folks in our communities on the other side of the state, on the other side of the country, on the other side of the county that aren't involved in agriculture, and be able to do that in a way so they can go out and they can do all the other things that the rest of the members of our society do. Whether it's being a nurse or a small business owner or an Instagram star or whatever they want to do, they can go do that because farmers and ranchers and everybody else involved in the supply chain is able to do that. So we have a great record over decades in this regard, but of course there's a lot more attention every day that goes by in this area for farmer and ranching families, and so the one precedent to the common ground aspect that's in the nutrition space and the farm bill space here has been the story of the last couple of years in the sustainability space, and talking about climate and other things with the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, and the fact that a lot of disparate groups, very diverse group of stakeholders have come together in that effort and sharpened pencils and found ways where there's common ground where we can promote voluntary, as I mentioned, market-based, science-driven approaches to farm policy to continue on that good record and continue to improve it as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Erika.
Yeah, Jacqui, I'd like to touch on two examples that are probably more traditional sustainability, and a third, as I really think about food insecurity in this country. As we look at sustainability, one of the things that Feeding America is laser focused on is the food waste we have in our system in America. We have some great partnerships on recovery of food. We have a technology called Meal Connect. You can see at www.mealconnect.org, where we have, through its time, been able to recover over 5 billion pounds of food from grocery retailers in this country. That same application helps us connect and share field rescued produce that is perfectly sound and edible with our 200 food bank network across the United States. So really making sure that as we have high quality edible food, that we can move that to people in need versus seeing that as food waste. A second area of focus is really looking at local food systems. We know that we work with partners like Joby and David here, but local farmers, local food producers. You heard Christy earlier today talk about how sourcing food and keeping food in a local food system in a local region can help advance farming and agriculture. It can help that community with a source of healthy local food. It's really a virtuous cycle that can lift up communities in terms of nutrition, food access, and farming. So that's another area of focus that we really have is instead of moving that food far distances, how do we keep it in a local food system? And lastly, and maybe a little bit more untraditional way in terms of sustainability, I think about how we look at focusing on the sustainability that helps move 53 million Americans who access the charitable food system in 2021 to a place where they can do better. You heard Chairman Thompson in his video talk about how lifting people out of poverty really does involve access to food as a starting point, but how do we create other opportunities for families and individuals to seek better employment, better wages, housing, healthcare, childcare, all those things. I heard words like access, choice, affordability, nutrition. Those are all things that we're really focused on with the Farm Bill coming up at Feeding America.
Very good. Well, we do have some Slido questions that are starting to come in, so I'm going to kind of lump a few of them together. One of them is from Richard Kottmeyer, and an anonymous one too, but it talks about the importance of educating all of us, everyone, about the important partnership, which Joby, you said, a unified farm and food policy, and explaining, why nutrition programs and farm programs should be linked, and also, there is a lack of awareness of food insecurity and how production agriculture truly operates, right? So we have disconnects on both sides, right? We don't always know how many people are food insecure, and we don't always know how our food is produced. So feel free, any of you, to jump in on the importance of educating and filling in that gap of those education.
Well, sure. Am I on? Okay. I'll take a first stab at that and just share. We did a survey recently, and I think we'll have some more points on this that we'll share. But just generally speaking, we went out and we asked respondents about their knowledge of the Farm Bill, and I think some 70% of people, about 7 out of 10 Americans, had not heard that much about the Farm Bill, weren't that familiar with it. 42%, I believe, felt like they hadn't heard anything about it. But then when they were asked about policy, when they were asked about farm policy or nutrition policy, you have significant drops in support for members of Congress and for farm policy when you drop off either piece of that. So I think the general public recognizes the importance of both aspects of the Farm Bill in terms of the nutrition piece and the agriculture program piece. A long time ago, and it's been mentioned before in the other panels and in comments, policymakers decided that the best way to approach our farming and food conversation was holistically from a policy standpoint. And that's been a proven success over the years. It's allowed us to have a view for policymakers and stakeholders and the public to take a look at our end-to-end food system and make policy choices about that. And our members believe that's an appropriate approach for a lot of reasons, policy reasons, of course, but also because it has that unified mission, that unified purpose of making sure that we have common sense and effective approaches to feeding our country and really feeding the world, and which American farmers and ranchers and the rest of our food supply chain system does.
Yeah, one thing we have to think about is talking about the integrated food system, not just around the time of the Farm Bill, right? So Farm Bill focuses everybody's attention, and that's a great opportunity to talk about this. But I think we have to think really hard about how we talk about it and frame that message in all the other years as well. Frankly, you saw this at COVID with supply chains disruptions. All of a sudden, things were gone from the shelves. And it was having to explain to people exactly where the food came from and what the interruption was and why it isn't on the shelves. I think we don't talk enough about that to folks, and people get very distant from understanding where their food comes from. And probably we have to do that consistently and not just when we're making this integrated message, probably.
All right, I'm going to lump another 2 questions together, and we talked about supply chains, and one of those questions is, how can we use procurement policy in the Farm Bill to strengthen our supply chain, as well as local and regional food systems? But then also, how do we better connect farms and food donations? How do we build better infrastructure from farm gate to food pantries. So, within the supply chain, how do we better connect farms to consumers, but then also to food banks, and are there policy opportunities within that as well?
Yeah, I can start off there, and I'll work in reverse. So from food producer to food bank, some of the flexibility we've seen recently in procurement practices through the USDA have been really helpful. We're all facing similar supply chain challenges in the industry, so when a food bank is ordering product through TFAP, for example, knowing that we've got the availability of that food, that we have the price model, the AMS organization has that price model understood, and that we have a reliable and predictable way to have that food deliver on time to the food banks is critically important. So allowing the flexibility to understand what types of foods are in need and have that reliable kind of advanced procurement program in place so that food can move reliably from the source, the food production source, to our food banks is really important, and something that flexibility has really helped us with in the last year. As we look at how we look at the supply chain and sourcing of food, I'll just say that through trade mitigation and through COVID policies related to programs like TFAP, the USDA federal commodity programs have made up between 25% and a third of the food that Feeding America supplies to people in need in this country. So making sure that we continue to have that support through the Farm Bill, that is critically important to this organization and other food and hunger-related organizations in the United States to be able to serve people facing hunger. We know during the pandemic, many individuals who were marginally food secure found food banks as an answer to help them get by. And with the inflation that's affecting all of us right now with the price of food, those individuals and families are still here, still seeking help from food banks, even though they are not food insecure, they may not qualify for programs like SNAP. So really focusing on the supply of food through programs like TFAP is critically important.
Well, I would just add that as we pursue these sorts of goals with connecting the farmer to a food bank or any other nutrition program to marketing at a retail level outside of the nutrition programs as well, that there's sort of co-benefits from that. Obviously, you have the farm family captures a bigger part of that food dollar. And so that goes to the economic sustainability of a farm operation, but then also improved health outcomes too. So when you have that fresh produce, the dairy and cheese, the meat products, those things that might be found on the outside of a grocery store, those are things that we're always wanting to find a bigger mix in the cart, so to speak, of families that are taking part in those programs and have better nutrition outcomes and health outcomes there too. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, I think, as we kind of look for these opportunities in the future.
I'm going to kind of wrap up here, and I want to give you guys each, not 30 seconds, I'll give you a minute or two. But I'm going to pose to you, what challenges do you see right now, but what potential solutions do you also foresee to address that challenge? And we're going to start back with you, Erika.
Sure, thank you. Well, it's just really been a pleasure to be on stage with Joby and David today. I think, the opportunity ahead is partnerships across the food industry and ag industry to support, a farm bill that can really take us forward. I encourage you all to take a look at the Farmers Feed America Coalition. This is a group that's going to bring those partners together to look at ways that we can really support, in a bipartisan way, a successful farm bill.
I think specifically to when you're talking about a farm bill and food and ag policy making in the coming months and so forth, that obviously the things that were mentioned on the prior panels in terms of the dollars and cents of the policy making and looking at baseline and those sorts of things. Obviously, those are things that have to be worked through. I'll repeat what was mentioned on the prior panels and recognized by Chairman Thompson in his comments, the challenges out here in farm country in terms of increased input prices and things like access to labor that we need to keep working on and we need to keep prioritizing. Obviously, that's a conversation mostly outside the Farm Bill. But those challenges are coming to bear, and then there's that long-term trend line on receipts in farm country. Those are big challenges. And things that will need to be addressed during the Farm Bill. I think that the big opportunity here again is that we do have a unity of purpose and a unity of mission that does provide common ground and bring folks together. We have a lot of new entrants. It was mentioned on the prior panel, or the first panel this morning, about the young farmer and ranchers and the folks that are coming into this industry. And so there's a lot of interest in folks coming into the industry and bringing new ideas, new approaches. That there are challenges, obviously, for entrance to that, and those are things I hope we're able to work on in the Farm Bill as well. But a lot of opportunities ahead, and I think there's every Farm Bill I think has its own challenges, and there's things that need to be worked through. There's tight margins in Congress. There's different parties controlling the different chambers, but that's not. There's nothing new there either. I mean, that's something that happens regardless. Every year, there's always a bipartisan conversation. There's a long tradition for doing that, and I expect that to be the case this year as well.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for having me here today. And the Farm Bill is an interesting, legislative vehicle because it really deals end to end with a huge segment of the economy. There aren't really many other parallels for that in terms of legislation. The challenge we have is pretty obvious. Legislating is always hard. Legislating now is really hard. But the opportunity is for everybody to work together. If we can stick together and have a cohesive set of arguments, that provides a lot of opportunity to deliver not only a farm bill, but a great farm bill, a transformative farm bill, an important farm bill. So we're committed to working closely with everybody here on the panel and the groups, segments that they represent, because we think that is the best option for delivering the best policy outcomes for the U.S. And again, thank you again very much.
Well, very good, and always good to hear a shared common goal and common ground of sticking together. And I think within this future discussion, and always too, because of the wide impact on the economy, very important. So I'd like to thank our panelists for this great discussion. If we could all just give them a round of applause. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Nally, who is our contributing editor here at Agri-Pulse, to introduce our next speaker. But first, let's listen in on a few words from our gold sponsor, Farm Credit.
This is the America we all depend on. These are the farmers who help build it. And every day, Farm Credit is here, just as we've been for more than 100 years, supporting rural communities and agriculture with reliable, consistent credit and financial services. In good times and bad, we provide loans to America's farmers and ranchers, farmer-owned cooperatives, rural homebuyers, agribusinesses, and rural infrastructure providers. From spring thaw to first frost and all the weather in between, Farm Credit understands the challenges and rewards that come with farming. We help agricultural producers feed the world and rural economies thrive. Our infrastructure lending helps provide rural towns with access to clean water, modern telecommunications, and reliable energy, ensuring rural families and businesses have the resources they need to prosper. We're cooperatives, locally owned and governed by our customers. So our commitments go beyond finances. We are deeply engaged members of our communities, supporting local 4-H and FFA chapters, farmers markets, and community services for the future of America's farmers and the food they provide to families every day. Farm Credit will be there. Learn more today